This week in e-commerce, episode 100. We have hit the milestone. I am Mal Chia here with you for another week, for the 100th week in a row, I should say. And with me is Alex, who's back from her brush with death. How are you, Alex?
I'm well, which is great. A touch of the flu, but I am back on board and back for a very exciting episode. 100. What a milestone.
I know. It's been quite a ride. And unfortunately, Paul, who was meant to be here today, we couldn't find any time in his calendar, and I certainly was not going to miss recording it this week. So I will have to catch up with Paul in person and record something then with him. But yes, it's been very exciting, and it's so good to have you on board for the last several episodes, Alex, and recording hopefully another 100 more.
Yeah, 100%. It's going to be
And
great.
how have you been? How have you been though? Like you obviously were dealing with some illness last week, and before that.
No, been really well. Well, off the back of, before I got sick, I had a very busy weekend. So went to In Conversations with the ABC. I don't know if you know that program. They were doing a live show at the Norwood Town Hall. So went to that on a Friday night, which is fabulous. And then on the Saturday, I was at Her Majesty's Theatre for And Then There Were None, the Agatha Christie play. So I was feeling very cultured seeing both of those different types of shows and absorbing all that different type of content.
Well, I think it's definitely good to have that after online retailer the week before.
Yes, exactly. And it's a good respite from all of my binge TV watching of trashy reality TV. So it's good to kind of, weigh that out.
And what are you binging at the moment?
What aren't I binging? I finished Southern Charm, so now I'm on to Summer and Winter House. Big Bravo fan over here. So anything on Hey You and the Bravo network I'm into.
Fantastic. I'm a big fan of Top Chef, which is my go-to. I've been watching that for I reckon about 20 seasons now, so it's a bit crazy. Still love that show. We'll always make time for Top Chef. But right now, a friend of mine has got me onto a German comedy thriller called Murder Mindfully.
Murder Mindfully. Okay, I'll write that down. What platform is it on?
It's on Netflix.
Brilliant. Okay. We'll have to check that out. Is it dubbed?
It is dubbed, but I'm a subtitle man. I can't the dodgy dubs I can't handle.
Yeah, I can handle the subtitles, and I actually don't mind the dubbed because then you can't be on your phone. You need to be paying attention. You need to be reading the subtitles and trying to make sense of it. So there's no kind of two screens going on at the same time.
And that's a really good call out, actually. I actually read a great article on The Atlantic about this, about why people are watching with subtitles on now. And part of that is because they don't want to have to always think about, am I missing something? Did I not hear that correctly? So having the subtitles on means that your brain you're reading it as well as hearing it. And it just means that you are understanding things a lot better now than before, when I remember having to record stuff on a VHS and constantly be rewinding it going, hang on, what was that? What was that? But now you don't need to. Only with Game of Thrones, but you can't actually see what's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, it has been a fantastic 100 episodes, and there's been so many stories which have covered off some really, really big news, which we've talked about, such as Mosaic Brands, also some really good news with Zimmerman, as you pointed out, with their $1.5 billion valuation. But what has been pretty clear about all of this is that, man, retail doesn't stand still at all, and it just keeps changing every single week.
Yeah, I think joining you on this podcast and thinking, okay, what's the news this week and then the next week? And at the start, I was a little bit worried in sense of it's going to be a slower news week, but it never is. There's always something going on. There's always something changing in retail and e-commerce.
And there certainly is. And this week has been no different because we've got quite a lot which we're going to get through on this 100th episode. First of all, we're going to be talking about Zara, where Zara recently have gone into some trouble with some of their advertising. So they've recently had some ads banned in the UK because of featuring super skinny models in some campaigns. Now, have you had a look at the ads?
I have. And what I thought was the most interesting was these women were, in model standards deemed kind of safe and healthy. But what stuck out was it was the editing, it was the way they made them pose, it was the lighting to give them that thinner look. So to me, that shows that there's problems higher up, right? And not just having those models in place.
Yeah, I think it calls out like the Advertising Standards Authority in the UK, who did go ahead and ban these ads. And also, I found out they also banned all of Marks and Spencer's ads recently as well for roughly the same issue. But it just shows that, people are starting to take more of a stand of this sort of thing, where they recognize how important it is to have healthy representation, in what you're seeing in the ads. Now, I'm not going to make this a Sydney Sweeney good genes discussion, but it's so important to be able to show people who are healthy, because they understand how it can impact young girls in particular. And you can see, like, with all the data around social media and the research about how unhealthy bodies can negatively impact young girls in particular, who then have depression, suicidal ideation, all these things. And I think anything which the government can do, any authority can do to really kind of improve those standards and ensure that people aren't seeing unhealthy representations of female bodies, etc., is super important to be doing.
Yeah, it's great to see governments taking a stance here. As a millennial growing up, you couldn't pick up a magazine without the headline being how so and so lost their weight in 10 steps, or look at so and so's body and how it's changed. It was always calling out the women's physique. So we've seen that shift, I'd say considerably. And now we're a lot more aware of, hang on, these are the dangers that we face as kids growing up and as women and girls growing up. So I'm really happy to see that the government is stepping in here.
Yeah. AKA Brands also recently announced that their recent earnings report, where they found that in Australia, their sales were pretty flat. And this is despite the fact that in the last quarter, they saw a 7.8% increase in sales overall, but very flat in Australia. Now, AKA Brands, obviously owners of Culture Kings and Princess Polly. Any surprises here?
Well, this is one of the first stories that you and I covered when I first jumped on, so probably a quarter ago. So I think it's interesting to start to see these quarters now back to back and diving into these stats further. I don't know if you'd call 0.1% growth a win, but they're obviously hanging on by a thread. But I'm glad to see that it's still obviously in the positives, but if you go back to last quarter, that's a big drop from, what did you say, 30% or something?
I can't actually remember what I said. 7.8%. So 7.8% decrease. So 7% increase year on year, which is in this climate, particularly globally, when you consider US and Australia, not too bad. But in Australia, it kind of reflects where we are at the moment. I'd probably say it's probably two things. That one is that there's lower consumer confidence right now, so that's something which everyone is seeing currently. But also, you also wonder whether Culture Kings has been around for a long, long time now. Culture Kings, 10 plus years. Princess Polly's also been around for a while. You wonder whether that newness and that uniqueness about those brands is still there, whether they still have the same pull as they once did. Whereas, Culture Kings used to be this symbol of being cool. For young men, if you were aged like 18 to 25, if you had that Culture Kings bag, that Culture Kings anything, it was a symbol of coolness. But now there's so many other brands now, it's hard to stay cool. It's hard to stay relevant, particularly when you've got such a huge catalog and you're having to constantly run sales and discounts. It kind of loses its cachet after a while.
Yeah, and whether you as a brand grow up with your original audience or you continue to target that youth in this case, and how well that's landing.
Yeah, and also when you figure the fact that I think the youth of today are like going to be the first generation who are going to be doing worse than their parents, like consistently here as well. I think there's just less disposable income amongst that demographic to really go around, not to the same effect anyway.
And growing up with technology, just being so much smarter, so more clued on
Yeah.
to marketing tactics, it's going to be interesting to see how they break through.
All right, and then now some positive news: the National Indigenous Fashion Awards, which I actually hadn't heard of before you shared this link with me. So that was really kind of cool to see that we have this specific award for Indigenous fashion designers, which I think is so important in our community, again, for that representation piece, to make sure that First Nations people have this opportunity to really shine. And it was really interesting to see a lot of the designs, which one, they were very unique, they were very ingrained in that culture. In particular, the winner, Claire Helen Parker.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point you say that you hadn't heard of this before. Look, neither had I. I actually stumbled across it because Barker, an Indigenous artist, was performing, and that's how I saw it as I follow her on Instagram, and then saw the news trickle down later on about the actual fashion awards. Amazing products, amazing representation, really, really cool designs, and bringing that culture to life. I would have liked to see more awareness on this. So hopefully next year it'll be bigger and better.
I agree, and I also hope this is something which people from who aren't necessarily First Nations can look at this and also want to wear this as well, because it is different, and that's the main thing which I think can be missing a lot in fashion. I had this conversation last week that, in particular in Australia, we tend to jump on trends and we just kind of play this follow the leader, where we see age doing well, suddenly everyone's dresses and designs look like age, whereas this is really unique. The silhouettes, the prints, the colors are not things which you would ordinarily see on contemporary Australian fashion. So I'm hoping that this is something which people from a non-Indigenous background can look at and also think, hey, do you know what? I'm going to give this a go, and we can really start supporting these designers who do have a very different, unique point of view.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
All right, we're now going to go into our deep dives for the week, and we've got three absolute crackers, I should say. The first one I'm going to talk about is some news which came out last week. Actually, came in overnight. I woke up, went to the gym, and saw the announcement that Yotpo are pulling away from email and SMS, and effective immediately, they are going to be shutting down their email and SMS product and selling the customer list to Attentive. Now, Alex, first of all, before I dive into my rant about this, really curious to hear your take about this move, because they're moving away from email and SMS and focusing solely on their core loyalty and reviews product.
Yeah, I think look, my take doesn't extend too much further beyond the fact that it's sad news. It's really sad news for, yes, their staff, really talented people in the SMS and email space, but more so for their customers, particularly with the timing of this. It's already a scramble to peak period and getting everybody's ducks in a row. So I can't imagine for brands that have, particularly those that have just migrated, now facing a new migration and the question of doing it now versus doing it later. And then also that kind of question in the back of their minds of, am I making the right decision because of now what's happened off the back of one of their more recent decisions?
Yeah, I know three retailers who I work with who recently went from Klaviyo to Yotpo and now looking to go back to Klaviyo as well. And it's something where I think at the time when Yotpo announced this, it was very much a move saying, hey, do you know what? We want to be your everything stack. We want to have all the parts of it. We want to be reviews, loyalty, SMS, email, and more. But it's really showing the fact that even if you do that, you still need to have a really, really strong product. Because from my experience anyway, it was really hard to find a competitive difference for Yotpo in the market besides for price. When you asked about the value proposition, it was a okay product, but it was nowhere near the level of sophistication as a Klaviyo. And also that convenience as well of working with a single vendor versus working with best in class. I think it also really just shows that people would prefer to work with best in class than having the convenience of just going to one place. And even then with Yotpo, it wasn't really just one place. You still had to go into 4 different platforms to access them, because that was still ostensibly 4 different platforms kind of tied together. And going now to just the reviews and loyalty, it's going back to the thing which kind of made them famous in the first place. And 2 products which I would say, like, they can honestly put their hand in heart and say, we actually have one of the best products in market when it comes to loyalty and reviews. But I don't think they could ever say that with email and SMS.
Yeah, what's that classic old saying, jack of all trades, master of none? I think that they're definitely masters of reviews and loyalty, and potentially that message got a little bit lost when they went a little bit wider. So it's going to be great to see them get refocused on that trust and loyalty piece. And loyalty, it's been making really big noise. Like, I've been hearing it from a lot of brands. A lot of people are onboarding loyalty programs over the last 12, 18 months. So it's a good time for them to double down on that and focus on that as that retention piece.
Yeah, I think with the focus though, like you said before, is a really key part of it. I'm going to keep throwing quotes out there, but Jim Collins talks about the hedgehog concept, where you need to focus on the thing which is your economic engine. And it can be really expensive, particularly in the MarTech space where there are so many vendors. If you look at the email space alone, who do you have? You've got the Klaviyos of the world, you have MailChimp, you've got a Marsis, until recently you had Yotpo, Attentive, like we talked about before. There's still so many more out there, like Bloomreach, for instance, who are now really trying to push into the market. With so many competitors, it's expensive to compete in this space as well, if you don't actually have a really clear value proposition in there. So being able to focus means that, you're in a market where you do have that competitive advantage. You can say, we can be the best in the world at, and you just double down to that. And this is actually something I see a lot anyway with retailers, where they keep expanding into new categories because they're chasing growth. And at some point, it just stops making sense, and they just stretch themselves too thin, particularly smaller businesses as well, who go from like apparel into skincare, into this, into that. And it's just like, hang on, what are you guys doing?
Yeah, 100%. And then, yeah, then they start doing pajamas whilst always doing sneakers, and then they've got homewares, and it's, yeah, you lose the focus.
Yeah, look, and a lot of people did that. A lot of people are doing sleepwear, but also footwear as well. You saw that with Lululemon; they moved into sneakers, and from what I understand, their sneakers business is not doing very well. But then also on the flip side, you have Gymshark, who also started looking at sneakers, and then kind of realized this isn't what we're about, and canned the whole project.
Yeah. It's a tough one for consumers, right? Like you, as a loyal shopper, you want to jump onto these new products and be rewarded for that. But then you're kind of being bitten at the other end when they say, oh, actually, we're not going to continue because our product wasn't up to it.
I'd rather they do that than try to string it along though, and just kind of
Yes.
keep dragging it on until it just falls over and dies.
Yeah. So someone like I mean, Gymshark have got the resources for sure. Lululemon are famous for their R&D. So uh, at some point, it's like we've got to have patience here, and they'll get there. But what does that product look like in the meantime?
Yeah. Okay, speaking of products and some changes, the kidult economy and Labubu, which I flagged last week, it might be something which we're going to be talking about. And one thing which we're seeing is this really huge growth over the last several months, or maybe in the last 12 months, around kidulting, which is this whole concept about, adults buying things to kind of remind them about their childhood and nostalgia. And there's so many products now which really fit into that category, such as Labubus, like we've talked about many times, Jellycats as well, which are just selling like crazy. And Jellycats, if you don't know, if you don't have kids, they're just super cute plush toys shaped like sushi or a hamburger or anything like that. I've got so many Jellycats here for my kids. I'm going to say it's for my kids, but really, we all know. Lego, which goes from strength to strength in terms of like how quickly and how much they continue to grow. And also Crocs and the Gibbets as well. Alex, what do you think has been driving this? And do you think there's an end to it as well?
I don't know if there was an end to it. I think that it's definitely peaking at the moment, and even the term kidult isn't something that I'd heard of previously. I think, as we've spoken about many times before, people are trying to express themselves, have that identity and that kind of personality in what they're wearing or what they've got at home. Potentially, people are just resonating with that more childlike part of themselves, potentially off the back of COVID, a lot of politics. It's nice to just bring it back to those more simple times when you can have collectibles as a kid.
Yeah, look, and I think when you look at a lot of what's working at the moment in fashion and apparel, is that licensing, but particularly the right sort of licenses still do incredibly well. Like Hello Kitty celebrated her 50th anniversary last year, so you saw lots of Hello Kitty collaborations, and they all went incredibly well. I had the pleasure of being involved in quite a few of those as well. Black Milk last week launched their new Pokemon collaboration, and that again did extremely well. So I think people, like you said, want to be able to tap into those things which they love, in some way, shape, or form. And I think kidulting is a way to do it in a very subtle manner as well. So rather than having to be like, dressed from head to toe and like as your, as a what's the Pokemon's name?
Oh, Mal, I'm not the person to ask about Pokemon's my friend. I'll say Pikachu is probably the only
Pikachu.
one that I've got.
Yeah, rather than being dressed head to toe on Pikachu, you could just have like a little Pokemon charm, for instance, where you still have this little thing which brings you joy without necessarily having to have something really outlandish to demonstrate that for you. Yeah, and I think this is something where, is like you said, a bit of a response to how people are feeling right now, that we're looking for this positivity. So almost in a way, this is like similar to the lipstick effect, where in economic times where things are tough or when people are feeling generally down, they will still invest in life's little luxuries. And that while we're seeing luxury sales start to flag because people are being more conscious about what they're spending $10,000, $20,000 on, they're still willing to spend $80 for a charm, or $100 for a dress. Yeah, something which still makes them feel really good, and lets them tap into a bit of feeling like a kid.
Yeah. And Thinking about the Barbie movie and Barbie core as well, just another example that we've seen of kind of giving people license to being more playful.
But one thing which came out in the last week, though, was that Arnott Capital, which is a hedge fund here in Australia, recently announced some data which I thought it kind of is counter to what we've been talking about lately, in the sense that they feel that the Labubu craze in particular is kind of about to burst, and that we're approaching that bubble bursting. And what they've said is that a lot of this is cited as being because the resale of Labubus, the price of resold Labubus, is actually declining as well. So when you go to the secondary market, they don't fetch nearly the same prices as what they did before.
Yeah, that's interesting. My understanding of the resale market for Labubus was there's a very high resale proposition for those rare ones. For your everyday ones, you won't see that value as much. But if you want to call Labubu a craze or a fad, it doesn't surprise me that we're getting near the end of that. It's been everywhere, all on my TikTok. I mean, the fact that you and I have been talking about it for a few episodes in a row now probably gives way to that as well. My rule of thumb is if there's a craze and at the end of it I'm ready to jump on board, then that's when we know it's coming to an end. It's not cool anymore.
You're the classic laggard.
Exactly, exactly.
Well, it's interesting because Pop Mart are still opening up a lot of stores. They've opened up a couple of stores recently in Melbourne. There's one in Adelaide, which has opened up. There's a Sydney store in World Square, which is opening up very soon as well. I wonder whether this is all coming a little bit too late. By the time or they all open, the craze is gone. However,
Yeah.
having said that, though, I did find a Labubu vending machine the other day. So in Paddy's Market in Sydney, there's a Labubu vending machine where it opens at a certain time. And when I was in there to do some shopping, I saw this huge line for this vending machine. I was like, what's going on? Why aren't they just buying something from there? And I went over there, and the vending machine itself was timed. So they had to wait to a certain time before they could get their Labubu. And the line was huge. There were maybe 200 people waiting in line for a vending machine. So just going by 2 weeks ago, the craze doesn't appear to be over yet, but we may be on the other side of the curve now.
The vending machine's a really great way of getting into that digital footprint. Well, sorry, not digital footprint, getting into that physical footprint, brick and mortar, if you will, without the investment of store locations. Opening up that many stores is a big investment, and it's also a time investment. Yeah, we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, the vending machine one is really interesting. I've had many conversations with clients over the last couple of years about how do we activate in certain places. So, for instance, like iPhone 17, 18, whichever one's about to launch in a couple of weeks' time. It's like, how do you make sure that everyone walking out of that Apple store is going to purchase an accessory for that, particularly your accessory? Well, why don't you stick a vending machine next to it, which is just selling your phone case covers or this or that or the other. So that's all they see. They come out, they want to protect their phone, bang, buy it straight away.
Yep. And when you see a line of 200 people behind it, that's also helping with the craze too.
Yeah, exactly, because it's the whole, you want to join the crowd, right? You want to make sure that you're part of that movement, and
Right.
that's how we're geared. That's how we're geared as humans.
Totally.
And speaking again, finally, following the crowd, or in this case, potentially not following the crowd anymore, is that one of my favorite brands over the last 3 or 4 years has been Crocs, and just seeing how they've grown from being the daggy shoe of all time, which everyone just mocked, to suddenly being this essential part of fashion now, where you see celebrities from all over the place wearing Crocs. Their shares recently declined 30%. And they cited two things. One was primarily, actually, they blamed tariffs, but the hypothesis, though, is that we're starting to see a change from that whole ugly, chunky shoe trend.
Yep, trends are circular. I'm sure in 10 years' time, we'll be talking about the rise of Crocs again, and we can't believe it. But yeah, look, unfortunately, I'm not surprised by this. They made a huge comeback and they held on for as long as possible. But how sustainable it is in the long term, particularly where it's fashion and no one thing's going to stay in that spot for so long.
And they've done a really good job in terms of like becoming culturally relevant again. Well, I guess again, I'm not sure if they ever were culturally relevant before, but they've done a really good job becoming culturally relevant. But maintaining that can be really hard, particularly like you said with Labubus. You now have like the fake Labubus as well. In this case, you can go to Bali or anywhere like that, and there are like a million Croc knockoffs. You can go to Kmart or Target, and there's Croc knockoffs as well. So why would you continue to buy the original? And similarly with Jibbitz as well, which they've really taken to another level in the business over the last few years. You go anywhere and you can get knockoff Jibbitz for anything you want. Like, it's really hard to protect that uniqueness, that IP, if it becomes so easy to copy.
Yeah, and gibbets aren't cheap either. Comparative to the cost of the shoe, when you see people walk around with gibbets, you're like, okay, you've got more gibbets than you do shoe here. And I think, yeah, as you always say, like that franchising, that moving with those different trends have done a really good job of keeping up with. Let's see how they kind of handle this downturn and what's next for them. What I saw that was super interesting off the back of this news was this reporter in New York, Instagram outfit of the day, reporting on the decrease of chunky shoes moving into kind of slim, nearly there shoes. So as we know, those mesh flats, which have been ballet flats, which have been in fashion now for probably 18 months. And that kind of translates to what we've just heard about with Crocs. We're seeing that decline, and then we're seeing the incline of these barely there shoes. We're also seeing Havaianas become a lot more popular, and that really is probably where, if you were wearing Crocs, now you're wearing Havies.
That's really interesting because one article which I read in The Atlantic recently is about how one of the big trends, particularly in TV and entertainment, is a reflection of fashion as well in terms of what we like. Where if you look a few years ago, a lot of the shows which people were watching were really based on escapism, whether it was something like Game of Thrones or even Squid Games a couple of years back. A lot of that's changed now, where the shows which are most popular are ones which are much more grounded in reality, such as The Bear, for instance. I'm not sure if you watch The Bear. It's a fantastic show.
Yes.
It's very like day to day in the life of a restaurant, and that's something which we want now. We want something which feels a lot more grounded and a lot more real. So you wonder whether this footwear trend is that, well, we're kind of going away from that really ostentatious sort of design, that really stand out stuff, to something which is a lot more subtle as well. Similarly, we're seeing with not people wanting $20,000 handbags, but maybe just wanting a charm. Are we also seeing that in footwear, where people don't want big chunky shoes, but they want something a little bit more streamlined, something which doesn't quite shout, "Look at me."
Yeah, exactly. And look, to the TV piece as well, it's that focus on more everyday interpersonal relationships and the nuances there rather than this escapism. So, yeah, agreed that that's kind of following the trend there with fashion behind it.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to be considering about what the next 12 or so months are going to look like. And I love looking at this. I love looking at culture and seeing where things are going to change, because it inevitably affects retail, and it inevitably reflects how we need to adapt, how retailers need to adapt with the times as well. Like, for instance, one thing which we're going to be seeing over the next 12 months is a continued growth in homewares categories, I feel, as well, because people with cost of living pressures, and they're not going away anytime soon, mortgages, rents going up, people are going to be thinking more about, how can I nest? How can I make sure that I make my house look awesome? So even with upcoming rate cuts, I think the categories which are going to benefit the most from that are going to be electronic goods, like home electronic goods, as well as the homewares category.
Yeah, it's an interesting take. We'll verify that in a couple quarters' time.
We will. We will. All right. Well, this has been episode 100. Thank you, everyone, for joining us over the last 100 episodes, the almost 2 years we've been putting this podcast on. It's been a real pleasure having you with us. I know there's something which we love doing, being able to share what's happening in the world of retail and e-commerce, and hopefully being able to inspire and educate you. If you do like this episode, please share it with a friend. Let us know about let them know about the podcast. Give us a 5-star review. It's a great way for people to discover the podcast. Alex, any final words from you?
Final words. Look, I'm proud of you and I'm happy for you. I think that this is an amazing podcast. Episode 100. I don't know if you ever thought you were going to get here, but it's an amazing legacy, and I'm really proud to be part of it.
Thanks, Alex. All right, everyone. In the meantime, keep innovating, keep growing, and keep selling. And we'll see you back for episode 101.
See you soon.